So let's show you how to convert an existing project to Web API 2. If you want to start a new Web API 2 project, you can certainly do that. You can use both Visual Studio 2012 and 2013 to do that. If you're using Visual Studio 2013, you'll simply be able to say File, New Project, and when you create an MVC project, it will be MVC 5 and Web API 2 by default. In Visual Studio 2012, you're going to have to create an MVC4 project that includes Web API and then do a number of steps to upgrade them. Of course, if you want to use Web API 2 and you have an existing project, you'll have to upgrade. And this upgrade is a step-by-step process. It's not simply right-clicking and saying upgrade to Web API 2. You're going to have to make some changes, and some of them are going to be manual by changing configuration files. But let's start with the simpler part of it, and that is making changes to the NuGet packages. So I'm going to right-click the project and just go to Manage NuGet Packages, and I'm going to go to Updates. We're going to see a number of packages that are updated, but I'm going to focus on the ones that are about upgrading to Web API 2 only. I'm not going to bother upgrading jQuery and Entity Framework and some of the other pieces that may cause some conversion problems. I'm going to focus just on those Microsoft libraries. So I found a process for doing this. There's actually a documented process from Microsoft on the ASP.NET website, and I'm going to show you how to do this step by step based on those instructions. I'm going to differ from them just a tiny bit, but for the most part, following those instructions is the right thing to do. The first thing I'm going to want to upgrade is actually ASP.NET MVC. Since MVC and Web API are sort of tied together right now, starting by upgrading the MVC will help us upgrade some of the packages that we won't have to manually do, since there's a lot of dependencies to MVC itself. So I'll go ahead and hit update, and it's going to ask me to approve the license, and there it's completed the upgrade. The next step is to actually look for Web API 2, and there's a number of pieces in here that are Web API. What you want to focus on is the Microsoft Web API 2, and this will say this package contains everything you need to host Web API and IIS. This is the one you want to update. Again, accept the license. We're also going to want to update the Web API 2 OData libraries. In our particular example, we're not using the Web API 2 OData, but it contains some other dependencies that are going to need to be updated, so I go ahead and update that as well. Accept that license. And we're also using Cash Cow in our example, so I'm going to update the SQL Server version, which is going to use the other two parts of Cash Cow, so I can update it in one fell swoop. All done. Another piece we'll need to update are the HTTP client libraries. Now, as you look through the pages, if you're a little confused about finding it, you can often just type search up here to find just the ones that match the substring. And there's our client libraries. We'll go ahead and update those as well. And the last piece of our example is actually uninstalling a package. There is a specific package in here that we no longer need called MVC Fixed Display Modes. This has been depreciated, as we can see here in the highlight, and ASP.NET Web API 2 doesn't use it, so we're going to go ahead and uninstall it. It's going to ask us to remove these other packages which we'll still need, Razor, Web Pages, and MVC, so let's say no to uninstalling them. This way it's only going to uninstall this package, not any of its dependencies. We also need to add one package, and that package is the Web Helpers package. You're going to want the one that's from Microsoft, microsoft.asp.net Web Helpers, and the version 3 of that, so let's go ahead and install it. At that point, we should be good in NuGet, and in fact, if we build, we're going to get a number of warnings here about remapping the assemblies. And that's actually the next step of what we're going to do. Because we've upgraded from version 4 of MVC and version 1 and 2 of Web API and some of the core pieces, we're going to need to change some configurations that tell the app to use specific versions. So the first piece is I'm going to go into web.config, and I've just formatted it, and I'm going to come down to the bottom where I have a list of these bindings. Now, if you're not familiar with the runtime assembly binding, the idea behind this is when an assembly is expecting a certain version of a library to exist, this is going to allow you to map what the expected library version to a known version that you are including. So if we come down here to MVC, we can see that it says, for every version up to 4, use the 4 version, in case there's other libraries that are expecting to use an older version. Because we're now using 5, we need to change this to 5. The same with web helpers. This used to be 1 and 2, and we need this to be 3 now. And 1 and 2 should be 3 for web pages as well. So these are the 3 changes you need to make inside of your assembly to change the versions from web helpers 2 to 3, MVC from 4 to 5, and then web pages from 4 to 5. And make sure that the max old version here is going to match what the new version is. That's typically the way these are done. 5 to 5, 3 to 3. In addition to these 3 assemblies we need to map, we actually have to add a couple more in here that have new versions that there may be inconsistent mappings for. The first one is going to be system.web.http.webhost. This is used by some components, especially cash cow, so we want to make sure that we're mapping all versions to the latest version, which is the 5.0.0 version. We're going to also need system.web.razor, and this version is going to be mapping all versions to version 3. And we can make a copy of this and include also webpages.razor, also from 0 to 3, mapping to the 3 version as well. We're also going to need to do this for a couple of other assemblies we need. One is web matrix.webdata, and there we're going to map that from 3 to 3, and webmatrix.data. The last change we need to make here is there's an app settings near the top that has the value of web pages version. And now that you're using the new MVC 5, web pages uses 3 instead of 2, so just make that change. The last piece we need to change is in the views folder, and we're looking for the other web.config. This is a web.config that is specifically for the views, and it has a number of changes in here around Razor and MVC that all need to be changed from the 2.0 version for Razor, from 4.0 to 5.0 for MVC. So we can just come in here and make the changes for these 3. And your configuration file in your upgrade may be slightly different if you're not working from our demo, if you're working from your own project. So be aware that when you make these changes, you want to make sure they are for the correct assembly in the case of MVC or Web Pages Razor or even just system.web.razor. We come down here, there's usually another piece inside the pages element. So we're going to want to make sure that because this is MVC, it's 5. Because this is MVC, also 5. And this last MVC, also 5. And here in the add assembly, we're going to go ahead and add that as an assembly type. And that should do it. And now if we build it, we should get everything running the way we want. And let's go ahead and run it in the browser. We're going to see the ASP.NET web page. And let's go ahead and just go to one of our APIs to make sure that they are working as well. So we now have an ASP.NET Web API 2 running website. Now we're ready to go ahead and use some of these new features, which we'll get to next.